Good evening, dear insomniac. Come in, and let me get that door shut behind you. There. Listen to it out there. It's been like that since dusk. Not a storm, nothing so dramatic. Just wind, going round and round the meadow, with nowhere in particular to be, throwing handfuls of leaves at my windows and running off again. I don't mind it. It makes the inside feel more like the inside. Take the chair by the fire. I've had it warming for a good while now, and it would be a shame to waste all that on an empty seat. I'm at the desk tonight, if you'll excuse me a moment more. I've just this evening finished something I've been at, on and off, for longer than I'd like to admit. And the ink's still going off on the last page, so I'd rather not move it yet. Let me tell you what it is, since you're here and I'm plainly bursting too. A while ago now, 2 travellers came in off the road together. An old man and his wife, both of them well into their 80s, and neither of them willing to be helped over the step. They'd come a long way. He got her settled by the fire and fussed with the blanket until she told him to sit down. So he sat. A moment later, he was up again to fetch her tea. And she said he's always been like this, in the tone of a woman who wouldn't change a thing about it. Then, between the 2 of them, they told me how they met. I say between the 2 of them. What actually happened is that he began, and she corrected him inside of 4 sentences, and it carried on that way for most of the night. He'd get a detail wrong on purpose to make her sit up. She'd catch it every time. They finished one another's sentences, and then argued about whose sentence it had been. I have never, in all my years, heard a story told quite so thoroughly by 2 people at once. It was a small story. I want to be honest with you about that. Nobody is rescued in it. There's no great peril, no long separation, nothing you'd put on a monument. It's 2 young people who happened to live 40 steps apart. And what came of that? When they'd finished, he asked me something, and she got hold of his sleeve while he asked it, which told me they'd discussed it before they came. He said they'd tried to write it down themselves years back and made a mess of it. He said their handwriting had gone, and their memories were going the same road. But this was a library, wasn't it? Things stay in libraries. Would I write it down for them? Properly, somewhere it would keep after they'd both gone. So I have. It's taken me a good while, because I wanted it right, and because certain parts of it kept making me put the pen down. It's finished now, as of about an hour before you knocked, and I've been sitting here since, with nobody to read it to, which I think makes you very well timed. They never gave it a title, so I've taken one from something she said near the end of the night. It's called The Long Way Round. Settle in properly. Blanket over the arm there, if you want it. That's what it's for. The house next door had been empty for 2 years, and Sam had got used to it as you get used to a gap in a fence. Completely. And without noticing you'd done it. It was the last house on the row before the road bent away toward the allotments, and it had a lopsided gate that had come off its top hinge before Sam was old enough to remember it being on. Nobody had ever quite decided who the gate belonged to. Sam's father had oiled it once, on general principle, to no effect whatsoever, and everyone had let the matter drop. Sam was 15, going on 16, and he was, by the general agreement of everyone who knew him, a quiet one. He wasn't shy exactly. He could talk to anybody if there was a reason to. It was more that he rarely found a reason to. He was one of those people who notices a great deal and reports almost none of it. The sort of boy who knows which floorboard in the upstairs landing gives you away, and how many days it's been since it rained, and which of his neighbours' cats is which, without ever imagining any of it is worth saying out loud. He had a bicycle with a wobble in the back wheel he'd never got round to fixing. He had a paper round in the mornings and a job stacking crates at the greengrocer's on the high street 3 afternoons a week. He had a shoebox under his bed with a good deal of nothing in it, bus tickets, a fossil, a coin he was fairly sure was foreign. And he'd have gone into the ground before he showed it to anybody. That was Sam, at the beginning of a long, hot, ordinary summer, on the morning a van pulled up next door. His mother saw it first, because his mother saw everything first. And that morning, she had a dish of scones cooling on the rack, and a very clear idea of who was going to be carrying them over the low wall. "I'm working at 11, said Sam. "It's 9:20. "I've got to get changed. You're dressed." So Sam went over the wall with a plate of warm scones held out in front of him, like a man delivering something he'd been told not to drop, came round the side of the van, and walked directly into a girl coming the other way with a cardboard box. They hit each other properly. Not a graze, a proper collision, of the sort where both parties end up sitting down. The scones survived. Sam had, on some deep instinct, thrown his arms up around the plate at the moment of impact, and he came down with it intact and held clear above his head, a small miracle he would be quietly proud of for the rest of his life. The box did not survive. It went out of her hands and hit the pavement corner first, and the lid parted, company with the bottom. And out of it, in an enormous and unhurried wave, came buttons. Hundreds of them. Thousands, possibly. A whole tin's worth, then a whole second tin's worth, spilling out across the pavement and into the road and down the gutter and under the van. Every colour there was, brass and pearl and horn and bright plastic, big coat buttons and buttons so small you'd lose them in your palm, every last one of them setting off in its own direction with tremendous enthusiasm. There was a silence of about 2 seconds. Then the girl, still sitting on the pavement, said, "Oh, they're everywhere." She started laughing, and she didn't stop for some time. Sam scrambled up and put the plate on the wall and got down on his knees in the road, and she got down beside him. And for the next half hour, the two of them crawled about the front of that house, gathering buttons out of drains and hedges and the gap under the gate. Her name was Clem. She was 16. Her family had come from 3 towns over, and the buttons had been her grandmother's, 60 years of them, snipped off every garment that ever went out of that house, on the grounds that you never knew. "She used to let me sort them," Clem said, reaching under the van as far as her shoulder would allow. "By colour, then by size, then by colour and size, which took a fortnight and made everyone in the house tremendously fed up with me. Are they in order now?" Clem sat up and looked at the 2 tins, which now contained a wild and total jumble of everything. "They were," she said, "before you. You walked into me." That's an interesting version. They got in the end, nearly all of them. Sam found a last few in the guttering days later and posted them through her door in an envelope with no note, which he agonized over for a full evening, and which she thanked him for so casually that he went pink about it in his own hallway. But there was one they never found. A small mother-of-pearl one, the palest sort, that Clem said had come off a christening gown and had been in that tin longer than she'd been alive. They looked for it for the best part of an hour. It had simply gone. "It'll turn up," Sam said. "Things don't, though," said Clem cheerfully, and closed the tin. And that was the last anyone thought of it for the better part of 70 years. She turned up at his school 6 weeks later, at the start of the new school year, and Sam who had spent a considerable portion of that summer thinking about the girl next door and telling himself firmly that he hadn't, found her standing in his form room looking at the seating plan. There is a particular horror in being 16 and having something you've thought about privately walk into a room in front of 30 people. Sam experienced it fully. Clem, who experienced no such thing, said, "Oh, good, I know somebody," and sat down next to him. The thing about Clem, and Sam worked this out over about a fortnight, was that she was as opposite the way two halves of a coat are opposites. She said things. She said them immediately, at volume, to anyone, to teachers, to the caretaker, to a man they once met at a bus stop who was still talking to her when the bus arrived. Where Sam noticed and stored, Clem noticed and announced. She was hopeless at maths and very good at art. She could not be trusted with anything breakable. She had a laugh that arrived a half second before the joke was finished, and a habit of taking your arm to steer you somewhere she'd decided you were going, and within a month she had comprehensively made Sam's small, quiet life about 3 times bigger without appearing to try. And they lived 40 steps apart. Sam counted them one evening, walking back from her gate to his. 40. It was, he decided, a ridiculous number. It was hardly a distance at all. You couldn't say goodbye properly in 40 steps. So they stopped using them. That was the whole of it, really. The thing the two of them told me about most, sitting by that fire, both talking at once. They walked home from school together, and the walk home was 40 steps, so they invented longer ones. They went round by the church, where the yew tree dropped things worth picking up. They went round by the canal, which added 10 minutes and had a heron in it that stood in the same spot every single day, entirely unbothered by either of them, like a landlord. They went the truly absurd way, up the hill and along the back of the allotments and down the lane on the far side, which turned a 40-step walk into a 50-minute one, and which they did, by Clem's later reckoning, several hundred times. Nobody ever said why. They'd get to the corner and one of them would say canal, and the other would say canal, and that was the entire negotiation. The town, meanwhile, and it was not a big town, conspired. They ran into each other constantly. It became a joke, then a slightly suspicious joke, then simply the arrangement of their lives. There was the library, where Clem went for the art books, and Sam went because it was warm and nobody spoke. The record shop, where neither of them could afford anything, and they spent whole afternoons anyway. The chip shop on the corner, where the woman behind the counter began, at some point, to hand over one bag with 2 forks in it without being asked. A development neither of them ever addressed out loud. He was stacking crates at the greengrocer's one afternoon, when she came in for potatoes, and stayed 40 minutes, perched on an upturned box, holding forth about a dog she'd seen. The owner did not mind. The owner thought it was the funniest thing he'd witnessed in years, and made a point of asking after her for the next 4 decades. She was at the bus stop when he came past with the papers. He was outside the swimming baths when she came out with her hair frozen into a shape. She sat behind him at the pictures, entirely by accident, wedged in with somebody else's family, and kicked his seat the whole way through. Come spring, on a genuinely coincidental occasion, they both reached for the same last bread roll in the bakery on the high street, and had to conduct a full negotiation about it in front of a queue. "This is getting silly," said Clem, on the pavement afterwards, tearing the roll in half. "You live next door." "It doesn't explain the bakery, Sam." Then came the summer, and the summer was the part they both went quiet about, in that library, all those years later. He started to describe it. She said, "Oh, the summer," very softly. Neither of them managed anything for a moment, and then they both started at once. School stopped. The days went enormous. They had bicycles and no money, and an unlimited quantity of light. That, it turns out, is the exact recipe for the best summer of somebody's life. They rode out to the reservoir, an hour and a half of pedalling, up a hill that defeated them both every single time without exception. They'd sit on the wall at the top with their lungs burning, and the whole valley laid out below, get their breath back, then coast down the other side with their feet off the pedals, screaming. They found a place where the river ran shallow over flat stones, and went there so often it became, in their private geography, the place. They brought sandwiches wrapped in greaseproof paper. Clem drew, badly, and then less badly, in a notebook that got wet more than once. Sam lay on his back, naming clouds incorrectly on purpose, until she threw something at him. Between them, over the course of that summer, they established a fact that would define the rest of their lives, that the two of them could talk for 6 hours, arrive at her gate, and stand there for another 40 minutes. Her mother took to leaning out of the upstairs window to call her in. 2 minutes, Clem would call back. You said 2 minutes half an hour ago. These are different minutes. Sam would walk his 40 steps home, lie in bed with the window open and the light not properly gone even at 11, and think the whole extraordinary thing over. He didn't say anything. Of course he didn't. He had a system now. The canal, the hill, the place with the flat stones, the bag with 2 forks in it. And the trouble with a system that works is that it is terrifying to touch. He very nearly got away with not saying anything at all. What undid him, in the end, was a jumper. They were coming back from the reservoir late, at the very tail of that summer, the light going, and the air turning cold the moment the sun was off it. Clem had come out in a t-shirt, because Clem always came out in a t-shirt, and she was doing her particular thing of insisting she was fine, while quietly changing colour. So Sam stopped his bike, dug his jumper out of his bag, and handed it over without a word. She put it on. They rode the rest of the way. At her gate, in the dark, she pulled the sleeves down over her hands and said, "Sam, how long are we doing this for?" He said, "Doing what?" which he admitted freely in that library, 60-odd years later, was the single most cowardly sentence he ever produced. Clem folded her arms. "There is a road," she said. "It goes from your gate to my gate. 40 steps. I've counted." Sam went very still. "You counted?" "Of course I counted. I counted the first week. Sam, I have gone the long way round with you every single day for a year, in the rain, through the allotments." She was going pink, and furious about going pink, which only made it worse. "I've been to that reservoir 11 times and I hate the hill. I hate it. I go anyway." "What did you think that was?" There was a pause of the sort Sam later described as the most useful silence of his life, in that it was the last one he wasted. "I didn't want to get it wrong," he said. "You've had a year." "I know. A year, Sam. I know. I was being careful." Clem looked at him for a long moment in the dark by the lopsided gate. "Well," she said, "be careful quicker next time." Then she kissed him, quite briskly, like a woman settling an outstanding matter, and went inside in his jumper. She did not give the jumper back. It was still in the airing cupboard 60 years later, by which point it fit nobody at all, and neither of them was willing to be the one to throw it out. What followed? Followed quietly, and mostly all at once. They finished school. Clem went off to study drawing and Sam to learn a trade, and for the first time in 2 years they were apart, and there were letters and phone calls from cold hallways with a jar of coins beside the telephone. And it was hard, the ordinary, unremarkable sort of hard that these things always are. By 22, they were old enough to simply decide, and they decided. They married in the church with the yew tree, on the grounds that it stood on the long way home, and using another one would have felt disloyal. Clem's grandmother's buttons came down the aisle sewn onto the back of her dress, mismatched on purpose, a lifetime of odds and ends catching the light. A flat, then a house, then a better house, with a garden too big for them. 2 children, both, alarmingly, loud like their mother. Clem drew for a living eventually, properly, for money, in badly lit rooms, and did good work. Sam built things and mended things, and became known throughout the whole town as the man to ask. They had all the ordinary weather, years harder than others. A stretch in the middle, when they were both so worn out they hardly spoke for a season, and came out the far side of it, as most people do, without ever quite being able to say how. And they kept the habit. That was the part he wanted written down more than anything. And for once, she agreed without arguing. They never took the short way anywhere. Not once, not in all those years. They walked the long side of the park. They took the road round by the water when the bypass would have halved it. They'd get in the car to go somewhere 20 minutes off and arrive an hour and 10 later, having gone all the way round by the reservoir, up that hill, both of them well past 70, and still complaining about it. Their children thought this hilarious and slightly mad, and grew up doing exactly the same thing, without ever noticing they'd learned it. There is one more thing, and then I'll leave them be. When they were both quite old, they moved out of the big house into a small one, and everything came out of everywhere at once, as it does with a move like that, boxes down from lofts, things found behind other things. In the last of it, in the bottom of a carton of oddments that had come from Clem's mother's house, and before that from her grandmother's, and had plainly not been opened since long before either of them was born, Sam found a small paper twist of nothing much. Inside it was a button. Mother of pearl, the palest sort, off a christening gown. It had never been in the road at all, never gone into the gutter, or under the van, or down the drain. It had simply never been in the tin that morning. It had spent the years since, in a box that outlived 2 houses, and both the women it came from, waiting for somebody to have a good clear out. Sam sat down on the floor, with it in his palm for quite a long while. Then he got up, carried it in to his wife, 83 years old, and working through a box of drawings, saying rude things about her own early work, and put it into her hand without a word. Clem looked at it. Then she looked up at him, and she said this to me too, in this library, long after the fact, with her hand flat on the table for emphasis. I told you things don't turn up. You did. I've been right about that for 60-odd years. You have. And now look. They put it in a little glass dish on the windowsill of the new house, where it caught the morning, where everybody who came in asked about it, and where, this being a house that contained Clem, everybody who asked got the entire story from the beginning, at length, with corrections shouted from the kitchen. Because it was never really about the button. It was about 40 steps, and how the 2 of them were perfectly capable of walking them, and how they spent 61 years going round the other way instead. There, it's down and it's staying down, which was the whole of what they asked. I did check with him before they left. I said it was a small story, all told, a spilled tin, and a hill they hated, and a boy taking a year to say a sentence. And were they quite sure this was the one they wanted kept? He said the big things look after themselves. He said it's the small ones that go missing. And he'd like this particular small one to still be somewhere after they'd both gone. She said he was being sentimental. Then she told me to write it down twice. So it's on a shelf now. Not a grand shelf, just a shelf, where things stay. The wind's still at it out there, and it can carry on as long as it likes. It's no concern of ours in here. There's nothing that wants doing tonight, and nothing you walked in with that needs sorting before morning. Set it down by the door and leave it there. You've a long way to go before morning, and no cause to hurry any of it. Sleep well, dear insomniac. Close your eyes now, and let the night carry you the rest of the way. Good night.